Okay, so thank you everyone for joining today. Before we begin, I just want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're all joining today and zooming in, lands in which we all live, work, and learn. I'm joining today from the land of the Gadigal people, from the Eora Nation. Please feel free to share the places where you're joining in the chat today and share that with everyone. And I would also like to thank you all for coming today and joining in this special seminar, which is a little bit different than the seminars that we've had up till now. So what we've had many times is just focus on one speaker in these lunchtime seminars and then having discussions around different topics that are sort of highlighted from that talk. But today we decided to try and mix it up a little bit and bring you three speakers to all talk about one common topic, which is citizen science and education. And so I'm glad to see all the people that joined today and came to listen to this really interesting panel. And if you have any questions or any things that you want to ask, feel free to write it in the chat, but we will also open this up for a conversation at a later stage during the conversation. I'm Yaela Golumbik. I will be moderating today. I also have a background that is related to citizen science and education. This is a topic I'm very passionate about personally, and so I'm very happy to hear from all our speakers today. And I will just introduce them one by one so you know who you're talking to. And I feel this is a really special panel that we have today because each one of these fantastic women that are joining us today comes from a completely different background and brings, very unique experiences today to discuss. So I'm very excited to hear everything you have to say today. So firstly, we have Dr. Erinn Fagan-Jeffries. She's a postdoctoral research fellow at the University of Adelaide and South Australian Museum, and she's studying, let me see if I can say this correctly, parasitoid wasps, yes. She is part of a team that is running the Insect Investigation Citizen Science Project for regional schools to document insects and biodiversity in their local area. The project was also a recipient of the new Inspiring Australia grants that have just been announced last month. So congratulations, Erin. Next, we have Genevieve Firmer. She is doing a PhD in chemistry education at the University of Sydney at the SCOPE group, the Science Communication, Education, Outreach, Participation, and Education. Previously, she was a senior science teacher and curriculum coordinator in the Northern Territories, and her research focuses on how curriculum influences classroom experiences for year 11 and year 12 in chemistry, and how teachers can be supported to use peer review education practices in their classrooms. Thank you for joining, Jen. Lastly, but not least, Arjumand Khan. She is an entrepreneur, environmental scientist, science communicator, and a passionate community capacity builder. She's the founder of STEM Catalyst, which is a grassroots community organization established by migrant STEM professional women. Art shares knowledge and passion for nature and for science through a wide array of STEM education activities. And she's also very active in the community and volunteers her time for several causes, social, environmental, and citizen science, of course. And so before I begin, we start talking about citizen science, maybe we can just hear from each of you a little bit about yourself, a little bit more from what I've sort of discussed. What are your experiences? What brought you to where you are today? You can just, Jen, why don't you start, just randomly?
Okay, sounds good. So for me, my interest in citizen science sort of came from this real desire to get involved in real science in classrooms. So I thought this seemed like a really good idea, but a lot of people sort of were like, oh, I don't know if this is really possible. But I came across this project called the Black Autumn Bees Project, where a neuroscientist had worked with students in England to do some real research on bees, and they'd actually managed to publish it in the Biology Letters journal. And that just sort of like sparked me. I was like, this is actually possible. This is something I can do. And so that was the beginning of my journey in citizen science. And then working in a school in the Northern Territory, we had some really interesting land around the school. We had some karst limestone area that had sinkholes. And it also had some endangered grasses, sorghum grasses, and possibly unidentified land geckos and land snails. And so I was really excited about this idea of potentially discovering and describing new species with my students. And so my journey sort of came from this desire to do real science with my students. And then we sort of ended up starting up this kind of grassroots citizen science project before I knew what citizen science really was. And now I'm working in a group with people like Yayla who know and understand they're really involved in citizen science, and I'm getting involved in that in the capacity of working through the Breaking Good and Essential Medicines projects, where we're looking at bringing drug design and discovery into a citizen science sphere there. So now I'm working on it in a more official capacity, I suppose.
Thank you, Jen. Arj, you want to go next?
Go. Yeah, thanks, Ella. And yeah, my journey to citizen science started back in 2017, where I was representing a global panel of citizens, global panel of migrant scientists and engineers from STEM backgrounds through a program in Royal Society of Victoria. And after that, even slowly, I've started concentrating that project in my local area. So 1 hour-long project was actually enlarged and magnified to be delivered to a primary school children, upper primary school children, where we gave them the opportunity in lunchtime and recess time that they could experience hands-on learning. So that was like a light bulb moment for many upper primary students. And they really felt that science, which is happening around us, can be felt through doing simple activities. So, and that really made the school management. So this is through CSIRO that we launched the program called STEM Professionals in Schools. And slowly we built up, and when the significant interest was developed, we were told that, you know, why don't we women who are volunteering for a school for 1 whole academic year go out there and, you know, set up an official ourselves as a vendor, so that the school can, you know, officially bring this expertise alongside teachers. So a bit of a background that I don't have a teaching background, but science and nature is my passion. So how can we incorporate that passion together, which amalgamates beautifully through citizen science, and we can create that spark in young, you know, an inspiration in young minds. So that's how STEM Catalyst came into being. Over to you, Erin.
I guess like Aj, I came from the science side of things. So I was pure research when I did honours, and I was studying little crustaceans. I then went and studied science communication at ANU, and that kind of broadened me out of my academic silo and took me into regional places of Australia, and I connected with people and got really excited about the idea of you know, science being more than just researchers in institutions and science being done by lots of people. So when I started my PhD, I wanted to find a way to do that and discovered citizen science, and that, you know, this idea was already a really established practice. And so that was kind of my first entry into it, was finding a way that I could incorporate citizen science into my PhD to allow me to, you know, broaden my project out from just me doing it in isolation. But also, I guess, selfishly, citizen science was a way that combined the two things that I loved, which was doing research and it was doing science communication and working with people. And citizen science was kind of that perfect combo of those two things.
Thank you so much. And I'm really glad that we, got to meet you a little bit and to hear about your journeys. And I find that when we look at citizen science and people that are doing citizen science, people come into it from so many different angles. And I think just find it really, really interesting to see, what that background is and what people's journey into citizen science was. And so now that we've learned a little bit about that, maybe we can hear a little bit about the programs that you're running and what citizen science projects you're involved with and how you're engaging young people in science through citizen science. Erin, why don't you go first?
Yeah, so the Insect Investigators project that we're getting off the ground at the moment is probably very, very close to my heart. It's something I'm very passionate about, and it's about getting regional school students to actually be part of discovering their biodiversity and documenting it, and then hopefully getting to name new species. So we're partnering schools with taxonomists, which are the scientists who name and describe new species. And in this case, we're focusing on insects. So the schools that we'll be working with will be running something called a malaise trap, which is a kind of looks a bit like a tent. It's sort of a freestanding trap that passively collects insects. And we'll then be doing some DNA barcoding of the insects in their samples and sending the insects off to scientists to tell us a little bit more about them, and then feeding all those results back to the school. And it's all about really trying to connect people with their local environment. And we think we've only named 30% of the insects in Australia, so there's so much to be discovered, and it really can't be done by the kind of employed researchers that we currently have. It's got to be a bigger effort, and we're kind of hoping this project is a way to start that. So we're just about to sort of do an official launch and try and get some schools and taxonomists involved. We did a little trial over the last couple of years with 4 schools in regional South Australia, and that was super successful. So yeah, hoping it all goes well.
That's really exciting. We'll all cross our fingers for you and for the success of the program. Arj, I know you also had some pictures you wanted to share and some videos, so feel free to do that.
Yeah. We actually, when we started doing citizen science, it was right in the middle of the pandemic, and when the schools were closed and we were working closely with schools, that's where we decided, to come with this innovative, way of keeping children busy and students busy in their continual process of learning. So we held webinars during the National Science Week, and prior to that, we were holding, the pandemic stress was getting intense, by mid-June, July last year, and being mothers ourselves, just a minute, please. That's the prayer call, just a minute. So there I am back. So as I was saying, that in the middle of the pandemic, when it was getting intense, children staying at home, and there was this 5 minutes and 10 minutes of walk that was planned. What best can we do? And that's where we decided that let's turn to these app-based citizen science projects, wherein we can keep their process of learning as a journey and encourage them more. So we started delivering free webinars to community children within our own contacts, first of all, and then to the outside community councils. When they came to know about this, they really loved the programs and they funded the programs. So we ran a fair few projects. If you would like to play the first video, there's only one video there. That was the project funded by Inspiring Australia. And that's where we taught children to code a small bank card size gadget called Microbit. And that was their learning to how to code, as well as going in there, backyard of the community house to find how much diverse life we can find. So there were two groups, a fauna group and a flora group. So basically the children who were placed in the flora group went and found as many different species of plants that they can find through their coded microbit, which acted as a counter. And they brought in some really amazing insects and creepy crawlies onto the table to view them close. So we've handed them LED magnifying glasses. We discussed their structures, and then we noted the biodiversity within that small space. And it was really amazing. If you could play that video, you know. There we go. Thanks, Yela. So that's something that, you know, that was in between the windows of those lockdowns. We planned that event, and that event was really liked by the community, and we kept volunteering after that. We kept volunteering for more because the interest is so immense that children love to, you know, go outdoors. We conducted a few more citizen science activities along the creek. And yeah, they were different to biodiversity. We were looking at the water bugs, and then we had a couple done on wild pollinators. So that's how, you know, outside of the schools, we were still using citizen science, same age group, same children. But again, I would say it's a very informal way of sparking the love for STEM.
Thank you. That really looks amazing. That video is so inspiring and makes us all want to go back and, you know, search for insects and things like that. Okay, thanks so much. Jen, do you want to tell us a little bit about your projects?
Yeah, so the sinkhole project I was talking about that we worked on in school in Katherine in the Northern Territory was kind of similar to both of those projects in terms of like trying to really get students and learners to get engaged with noticing insects around, noticing biodiversity. And we also sort of tried to go into the sort of fire management space as well. So we try and monitor the way the land changed. We have a wet season and a dry season, often fires in the dry season every year up there. And so we'd also try and get that sort of ecological management involved in that project. So that's kind of similar to what Erin and Arj are doing, but the projects I'm working on now at the University of Sydney are very different to that. They're chemistry-based projects. So Breaking Good project is one that's mostly lab-based. So we're working with the public, but mostly undergraduate students and sometimes year 11 and 12 science extension or chemistry students to involve them in the drug discovery and design process. We've worked with the open source malaria project and the open source mycetoma project to develop some new medicines, and also worked on different ways of synthesizing medicines that we already have with the Breaking Good project, and involving students in, maybe if they can't get into the lab, thinking of ways that they could look at the reaction mechanisms and design those medicines. So that's the Breaking Good project. And the Essential Medicines project is kind of almost, you might describe it as a spin-off of that project, where we're looking at the accessibility of those medicines. So I sort of like explaining it to students as there's no point in all these scientists making these amazing medicines if no one is able to, or feels like they can, or feels safe accessing these medicines. So the Essential Medicines project is an online project where we're getting people to do research online or in their lives and try and help us to understand the accessibility of existing medicines around the world. We focus on the WHO's, World Health Organization's essential medicines list, so the medicines that really everyone in the world should have access to. And we try and understand some different aspects of that, whether the prices have changed in different places or the way people are interacting with those medicines on media. They might have seen or heard things about it, and we're trying to gather information about that. And then also we have a challenge where we look at sort of the broader life cycle of medicines and get students or the public to be involved in understanding like business changes and changes in registration of what medicines are used for over time, just anything we can find on those medicines. And my particular involvement in that project is trying to sort of insert it into this school space. So we've got the project very well established with Yayla's leadership in the sort of public sphere, and I'm sort of trying to help find ways to bring that into a year 9 and 10 school space. And we're starting off with running some workshops, and we're starting to chip away at moving towards a teacher-led model where we can embed it into a chemistry and biology unit, and teachers can actually run the normal curriculum and like with the citizen science lens, the essential medicines lens as well. So that's what I'm working on at the moment.
Thank you, Jen. And Jen and I have been working together for the past year or so on some of these projects, and Jen's work has been really amazing in bringing her perspective and her professional background as a teacher into the project, and thinking of ways to incorporate this in schools, sort of looking through those lenses. And I think that's something that is really, really important, because as I said, we all come to citizen science from a different place and from a different background. So maybe we can talk a little bit now about how you think that background, and particularly your background, Jen, as a teacher, has influenced your involvement in citizen science. And each of you can obviously speak from her experience.
Yeah, so maybe I'll jump in. I think there's lots of things we experience from the research perspective in terms of sort of the challenges and opportunities of bringing citizen science into schools. I think a lot of people here today would really agree that they've seen incredible outcomes of students really getting engaged, seeing that spark in their eye, not just in relation to science, but I think for me also seeing students just really sort of take leadership and take ownership, take control. The students I worked with in the Northern Territory that are involved in my project were arranged to kids that were the top of the class to students that really had trouble engaging in the formal schooling system. And I saw a big change in all of them, and that was wonderful. But I think what I wanted to sort of nut this down to today was sort of 3 things that maybe I can see here that might be challenges from a teacher perspective, and just things that we need to be aware of when we're asking educators to get involved in citizen science. And one of those things I touched on before is that sometimes for people who haven't been super involved in science before, they might think you're a little bit sort of out of touch if you're saying, yeah, I want to do real genuine science in schools. And people are like, you can't do that. What are you talking about? And I think that can be a real challenge. And I think maybe if as a group here, one of the things we can do is work on really promoting some really good examples of citizen science and students doing amazing science in schools. That would actually be really powerful, because there probably are teachers out there who want to do this but aren't really able to, because it doesn't seem possible to a lot of the people around them. I think the second thing is that citizen science is a very project-based, it's very student-driven work, and there's really uncertain outcomes. And one of the things we need to keep in mind is many teachers to do that in a classroom are going to really have to completely overhaul the way they teach. Many of us teachers have been taught, you know, that the way to teach is to come in and communicate the science, that science is sort of an authoritative, truthful thing. And you don't necessarily feel comfortable with the idea of like critiquing or questioning that. And if personally you don't feel comfortable with that, it's hard to lead that in a classroom. And I think I'm sort of coming to the realization that unless you're sort of critiquing other people's processes and conclusions and their thoughts, you can't really engage in the scientific process. So this idea of science as an authoritative thing is really sort of getting in the way of us being able to bring citizen science into schools. And I know there are plenty of teachers out there who look at science differently and understand that critique thing. But if we're engaging lots of people in it, like teachers in many ways are going to have to really completely overhaul the way they act in the classroom. And you sort of have to give up some of that power and authoritarian, like feeling like you know the answer to everything, because it is citizen science, we don't know the answer yet, and students are going to be asking questions we don't know yet. So you really have to completely overhaul this thing, and that's really deeply personal, really embedded in who you are in your professional and personal identity. So it's really, really challenging, and it's important when we're going into schools that we sort of understand that. I think the third thing is that citizen science, that this uncertain outcomes thing. When you're a teacher and you're trying to plan assessments, you need to make sure it fits in with the requirements of the curriculum. You need to make sure it's accessible in a certain way. You need to make sure that's fair. So imagine trying to write a rubric and you're going to say, all right, the students all need to create a graph and they need to do a line of best fit and they need to do a regression analysis or something like that. And then it turns out some of your students are asking questions and getting qualitative data and they want to actually do a bar graph, and all of a sudden your assessment doesn't work. But because of the school system, sometimes you have to send out those assessments, get them approved, send them out to families 12 months in advance, so you're stuck. So it can be really hard within a school system, and a lot of them are quite rigid, to figure out how you're going to fit it into a unit, figure out how you're going to assess it. And unfortunately, schools are very time poor in some ways. So if it's hard to run something in a classroom that doesn't fit into that curriculum and assessment structure. So it's really important, I think, as citizen scientists here, that we do some of that legwork to help bring those things together. And I think the learning by doing and some of the stuff I'm just doing with the learning by doing project and mapping out citizen science projects to the curriculum is a really important first step. And so I think those 3 points, the sort of that a lot of people don't think this real science is possible with students, that it's really project-based, student-driven work. So you have to do a complete overhaul of pedagogy and the way we think about teaching, and sort of fitting it into the school system sort of illustrates really nicely that the school is a really complicated world, and we're trying to bring the school world together with the academic world. And I think it's really important that we all keep an open mind and understand that we don't understand each other's worlds, and we try and help each other understand each other's worlds. I'll say that because I was a teacher first, and now I've come into research, and I was trying to engage a bit with scientists sometimes, and I could get really frustrated. I'm like, why can't you be flexible? Why can't you just help me do the things I want to do for my students that I really care about? What are you doing? But now I understand that academia is also a place that there's really rigid timelines. There's really like important things that you have to fit into the system. And so you're both working from really kind of in some ways rigid systems, and you need to find a way to bring that together, and that's tough. So I think there are things we can do to help understand each other's worlds in order to work together really collaboratively. Yeah, they're very different worlds, and we need to work on understanding them. Yeah.
Jen, that's a fascinating perspective. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think we all have a lot of things to think about. And I think we often don't step out of our comfort zone to look at other people's perspectives and other people's way of, thinking about things and their requirements and their, systems. So I think that's a really important message. Erin, which one of you wants to go next?
Yeah, Erin. Please go.
Yeah, I think a bunch of the stuff that Jen has raised are things that we're trying to work through and process, and the team that's involved, I think, is so critical in that, as I said, I'm from a science background, I don't have a teaching background. And so for me, it's been really important to have people who do have that teaching background or who have worked more closely with teachers to help us, do things so that we do have a curriculum linked list, which was the first thing when I started talking to teachers, that's what they wanted. And, you know, it was like way down my priority list, whereas for them, it was, you know, right up the top. So yeah, that way of compromising and finding ways that the project works for both researchers and for the teachers and educators is so important. And I'm finding that can be quite challenging because we've got taxonomists and scientists who are part of the project who have done very limited work with the public before, and some of those perhaps have a bit of a challenge of the compromises we're having to make to the scientific side of the research so that there are better outcomes for the teachers and the schools. Because obviously if you were given this amount of grant money just to do the science part of it, you would do it in a very different way from the way we're doing it as a citizen science project. So trying to find that happy medium between where we get good outcomes for teachers and they get what they want out of it, and that students have some learning and, you know, some benefits out of it, but also that the research is sound and we get real research outcomes as well, is probably the biggest challenge that we're facing at the moment, which I think echoes a lot of the things that Jen brought up.
Yeah, Erin, yeah, totally agree with, you know, both of your opinions, Jen's and yours. But, you know, for me, I think one step forward is that looking around us and learning from the global countries is that countries who've already done this many, many years ago, and they've seen the output of such a connection. I think the US, from my research, what I've learned is that US has actually started a side complementary, you know, complementary body of national informal STEM network. So this is again citizen science and an amalgamation of citizen science into schools, into communities, and into, you know, so it takes over all age groups, not just students, you know, and adults as well. So starting from pre-primary, primary level up to tertiary level, and, you know, ahead of that into research, we've seen countries taking lead and getting the outcomes of this process. So we are lagging a little bit behind in that sense that, you know, we would want to bring in that thing which has already been done. We're not really like making something new that's absolutely not comprehensive, or that's not comprehensible by, you know, other faculties. But that's where I think if someone's an expert in research, or, you know, doing a research on a particular species and things like that, we see that, you know, they are the experts, they're the subject matter expert in their own field, and having that cross-curricular connections really enhances the outcome. So again, as Erin said, you know, I don't have a teaching background. I don't know those teaching terminologies which schools use, and that really stopped as a barrier, you know, that we couldn't continue showing how important a particular citizen science project would be for a grade 4, grade 5. But then it's more of a thought that teachers, majority of the Australian primary school teachers not having a STEM background, that's impacting the way how children perceive science or STEM in their learning. So when they are in high school, when the disengagement is here, there's a huge hue and cry that there's a disengagement. Let's have programs, you know, to bring back their attention and bring back their concentration to these subjects. Whereas I believe it's a little bit too late down the track. But if they are, you know, in grades in middle primary years and upper primary years, that's where the engagement happens, and that's where it could be playfully embedded in their curriculum. So as Jen mentioned, you know, we are working, STEM Catalyst is taking, you know, going to undertake that work with a research project called Learning by Doing with the University of Sydney, wherein we would be sitting down with a team of, you know, teachers and the LBD team, and mapping out the citizen science projects against the curriculum. So that's the next step, and yeah, hopefully we will get there, and yeah, we'll have more outcomes of citizen science into education.
Thank you so much, everyone, for your perspectives. That was really, really interesting. And what you've touched on just towards the end, Arj, about trying to incorporate the citizen science activities into the curriculum, I find that is really key in order to engage the teachers and to really get all those learning outcomes that we're hoping to get from engaging young people with citizen science. And I've been talking to a lot of people lately about, best practices in doing so. And that is something that continuously sort of is brought up as a really, really important point. So maybe you can talk a little bit more, Arj, of how exactly we can do that. And then I'll also want to hear about from Jen and Erin. How do we do that? How do we connect citizen science to the curriculum?
Yeah, that's like $1 million question, Yela. We definitely, we definitely look at the content. Say again, that emphasis that teachers know what they really want through that particular unit or topic of curriculum. Whereas we've got this broad spectrum of many topics involved, and there are citizen science project that has got the cross-curricular outcomes. So when we are doing, say, for example, we're taking tree measurements or doing a land cover project, we're involving a lot of mathematics into that, So once we're able to nail down the cross-curricular relationships and the direct outcomes of those projects, that's when probably, it's easy that we can let the Department of Education know about how we're going about the mapping of these citizen science projects. So one example of that was the video that we've just seen, is that even though it was a lot of tech-based thing, but there was a nature element to it. And having those calculations or having those cross-curricular components coming together in one component really helps teachers tick those boxes, that they're trying to cover during that term of study. So I think that from the environmental perspective, there are several things, there are several projects that can go across not just science, but through all aspects of STEM, including STEAM and including medicine. So that's where I believe that, we can map these outcomes, direct outcomes, as well as cross-curricular outcomes, and help it, help it, the teachers get the most out of it.
I feel like one of the really key parts of trying to integrate citizen science into school curriculum would be making sure that it is super flexible, because so many projects are short-term grant funded, and you could get, a school and a teacher really keen on one particular project and get it super integrated into their general curriculum, but the next year that project no longer has funding and isn't running. So finding a broader way to have citizen science as part of school curricula without it being very project specific, I think would be really important.
I think Arj and Erin both bring up some really good points here. I think Arj is really right with the cross-curriculum priorities and the general capabilities. It's really easy to see how citizen science fits in with those and hits a lot of the numeracy, literacy, ethical understanding, critical and creative thinking. All of those things are really important so we've got like a 3D Australian curriculum, and it's both the content but also the cross-curriculum priorities and the general capabilities, and citizen science fits really nicely in there. I think when it comes to content, one of the things I'm starting to realize when I'm looking at the Essential Medicines project is, I think, sort of looking at the curriculum points and also having a look into some of the learning progressions literature to try and start to understand how you can look at the curriculum a little creatively, have a look at some of the things that students need to know to get to where they need to be at the year level you're looking at, and look at where they're going in terms of year 11 and 12, or things you think as a science or STEM professional skills and understandings they need, that the thing they're supposed to be learning in that particular year might help them get to. So you can draw on those sort of things that are above and below along the learning progression spectrum for those particular content that you're looking at. That's an idea I'm starting to play with. I think Arj made a really good point that teachers know what they want to get out of the particular unit, and I think it's really important to sort of sit down and listen to them and cultivate really strong conversations and understand what they think they can get out of the unit, what they think the students can get out of the unit. I think Erin makes a really great point about being flexible. One of the things that has come up in our project is we really like the project to go straight into a whole unit embedded thing, but we really have to work with the school and see what they want and what they're willing to do. And I talked about before, it's sometimes teachers really have to rethink the way they do education to embed citizen science. And one of the most persuasive things is seeing the way the learners respond to these projects. So sometimes what you need to do is embed the project in a really small way, like a day or a couple of weeks, and then you'll get really good, we know we're going to get really good outcomes from the learners, and then you'll get a whole lot more people in your staff team on board because they'll all know that you're going to get those outcomes, and you've got a much better chance of embedding the citizen science the year after. And I also want to draw attention, it's not just the curriculum we need to think about, and this is something I realized recently as well. There's an Australian Institute of Teacher and Learning, Teacher and Leadership, AITSL standards, AITSL. Teachers have to demonstrate that they can do those standards. They have to demonstrate whether it's proficient, highly accomplished lead teacher. And go and have a look at the website. There's a whole lot of different things they can do, and there's really nice illustrations of practice. I think if we can think about how teachers can demonstrate that they're a really great teacher really solidly through being involved in citizen science, that's also a really strong way we can start thinking about this as well.
Thank you so much, Jen, and everyone. Jen, maybe you can pop a link to that in the chat so everyone can get a look, because that I think is a really important point that you've highlighted there. Okay, so we've talked about incorporating citizen science in schools and through the curriculum, and we've talked a little bit about, you know, how you sort of are doing it, why you're doing it, but I want to go into that a little bit more in depth. Why citizen science? What's special about citizen science that you're so excited about it in the context of students? What kind of learning did you see or do you expect to see with students that is something that you can't get in any other way? I'm going to let you decide who's going first.
I think Arj should. She explained this really nicely.
I think the name itself, you know, stating citizen science, because science has, as Jen mentioned, you know, in the discussion, that it's so authoritative, and it really, you know, makes it fearful for people when it comes to, you know, not really into doing science, or, you know, making people from different backgrounds. Basically, what I'm talking about is like they really fear. And what citizen science is, that opening this, you know, the philosophy of, you know, anyone can do science, and you don't have to be an expert. Probably almost majority of the citizen science project has got this line under that you don't have to be an expert. You don't have to come from a citizen science background. That really invites people of all ages to come and participate in any project, and that opens up the willingness. So may it be through nature connection, or may it be through you know, other aspects of doing citizen science in laboratory settings. That's something that's the first thing that I would say, you know, we really want to bring in people there, or develop interest in, and the outcome, you know, where we are focused is STEM learning, obviously, because as they say that in 2030 or beyond, you know, 5 to 8 years from now, we don't know what sort of jobs would exist, or the existing jobs, whether they would stay or not. So we do need this new expertise where children are not, or the new coming generation is not fearful of any of those major STEM disciplines. So that's why I believe that it's so doable, friendly. It has got the extra tangents, I would say, that mental health, socializing, other aspects that people come together for different levels, not just studies and academics, but they can socialize. And while we were doing these projects with youngsters, a couple of councils around us approached us doing this for only women, or children or families with children, or how can we involve men doing these projects? Are the projects flexible or adaptable for for a men's group? And it totally came down to what we're doing and how we can support. We've given them the ideas and things, but I think that those projects are still in pipeline. But as I mentioned, outside of the academic circle, these are so flexible. Citizen science projects are so flexible, and the outcomes could be from any of those perspectives. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, for me, I think citizen science is that key thing that takes learning science away from learning content, which I think is so much a part of science in school, and even in undergraduate, at university, it's very content focused until you hit, honors, master's, PhD level, whereas citizen science allows you to instantly be more about learning the process of science and learning about discovery. And I mean, that's that key thing that makes us all become scientists, is that thrill of discovering something new. And I think being able to have that at that earlier age in a structured way through citizen science projects is a really cool thing.
Yeah, I think Arjun and Erin have really discussed that really nicely. I think when it comes to education, we have this saying about how it takes a village to educate a child. And I think citizen science is a really beautiful opportunity to achieve this thing. Like, a lot of schools are really trying to find ways to connect the communities, their local communities, parents, families, and everyone in the community to get involved in schools. And citizen science is a really wonderful way that you can do this. And I saw that in the project that I was running in Catherine. And yeah, and I think citizen science sort of really brings science out of just the content and connects it to the real world. Like Erin said, learners and young people will be able to see how science is actually relevant to the world around them. And that's really powerful.
Okay, I hope everyone's convinced that citizen science is the next thing. But as we know, as everything in life, there are also challenges that come with it. And so for my last question, before we sort of open this up for a broader discussion, I would love to hear, some of the challenges that you've had in the process of engaging young people, of engaging with schools, because, it sounds so great, but we know that, things take time and they're a process, and we want to hear about that as well. Erin, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I think we're probably still going to come up to that stage. Probably the one thing that, in terms of discovering what the challenges are, because we're yet to really do broad scale involvement of teachers in schools. Some of the ones that I've come up with already, I guess, have been the limitations of being able to personalize the project for each individual school or teacher. Because as Jen and Aj have already sort of said, every school and every teacher is different, and they're going to want to use the project in different ways, but we have limited resources in terms of how we can structure it. So being able to incorporate enough of that schools and teachers feel comfortable taking it and using it without us, stretching ourselves too thin in terms of, offering a multitude of different options in terms of resources and project designs and all that kind of thing, I think will be a challenge, especially for us, as we're not restricting it to any particular year level or age group or anything like that. Having project resources that teachers at grade 3 level and grade 10 level can both take and adapt, I think is one of the challenges we've been discussing in the project team at the moment.
Do you want to jump in, Arj?
Yeah, I just want to mention that the in-bit, like the more we have people involved in it, and the more it is popularized, I would say that there are certain programs, global programs, wherein it's only connected with citizen science is connected to those schools because they've registered and they know about those programs. So it's like, if the more we popularize, I believe that that it's going to be easy, and it's not just through schools as we've focused into education, but through all other spectrums, through community engagement and through other initiatives through councils, that we can spread out these projects. That would be helpful, yeah.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think one of the issues that sort of I just touched on is, at the moment in Australia, not that many schools really know that citizen science is the thing they can get involved in. So if we can find ways to spread that and popularize that and spread that message that it is possible and it has wonderful outcomes in ways that make sense to teachers, and sort of reflecting on sort of like, teachers don't have access to the research we have access to a lot of the time for time, and even if it's open access, they don't have time, but often it's not open access. How can we sort of get that message out in a way that makes sense to them and is persuasive to them, I think is something we need to think about. We talked also about the challenges of gathering feedback sometimes. We often perceive feedback, I think, in science as sort of maybe a way to measure the impact of our projects, but I was sort of reflecting on how can we actually build relationships that are strong enough that schools can say, hey, that really didn't work, that was rubbish. How can we build those honest, genuine feedback conversations to actually build on our projects? And I think also Erin touched on this resources thing. I think we said before, both schools and academia are a place that are really time poor, really restricted in many ways. And I think some of these citizen science projects really require this building of long relationships over time. And that can be really tough, particularly for early career researchers, when you're sort of supposed to jump in, get a project done in a year or 3 years and then jump out. That's really tough. And the other thing that I know there's starting to be conversations about this in the space of working with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, is like building collaborative projects with people in the community and the ethics process, where it's like, you really want to build this collaborative project with the people you're involved in, but you're not really supposed to do that until you've done your ethics. But to do your ethics, you really have to know what the project's going to be. So how do we get around that? How do we work within that framework? I don't know, but I think that's a challenge that I see in building those genuine collaborative citizen science projects.
Okay, I want to thank you, Jen, and thank you, Erin and Arj. Just to sum up what I've sort of feel that I've been hearing from the three of you and from other conversations about citizen science and learning, I feel that there's a lot of potential and there's so many great things about it. And I think what we have to remember as citizen science researchers and practitioners and educators is that as everything really, it takes some effort and it takes some design, and we have to think really carefully what we're doing and who we're speaking with and what the needs of the people on the other side are, not just what we want to implement and do, but what teachers need and how teachers, how they, practice teaching in their classroom, and what the requirements from them are towards their teaching goals, and working really together with teachers and with schools in order to come up with programs that really work for everyone. And it's a process, and I think that's the main thing that we have to remember, that it's not something that we can just send out and will just happen. It's something that we have to continuously work on. as we know from our research and from our other practices, I'm sure. So don't go anywhere. We're not finished. We're just finished with the more official part of today. But I do want to open up for everyone to open up their cameras and have a conversation. We did have one question in the chat, which I think is not particularly directed to any one of us, but maybe we can all offer some of our perspectives, and maybe some other people in the chat here can also help. So we have a question from, I hope I'm pronouncing this correct, Masudur Rahman, asking about citizen science projects in developing countries and specifically in Bangladesh. So I'm not familiar with particular projects in Bangladesh, but I'm sure there are, because citizen science is just growing so quickly. And there are lots of global projects which you can engage with from anywhere. But if any of you here are familiar with anything in particular, I'm gonna spotlight Michelle here, which just knows everything there is to know about citizen science. Maybe you can provide an answer as well.
Thanks, Yela. There's lots of international citizen science projects. You can also check out citizenscience.asia. There's projects.citizenscience.asia / is actually a list of all the projects. So it's actually an Excel list, and I'll stick it in the chat, of all the ones that they're finding at the moment. I'll put that in now. We've also got quite a few, and for those in developing countries in particular who perhaps don't have access to internet, etc., pen and paper works just as well. There is a website you can make your own one up and then print out stuff called anecdata.org. I will put that up as well. And you can actually make your own citizen science projects on this one. And it could be anywhere in the world. It has a free app. You can just say which project you're aligned with and it does it all for you. But otherwise, SciStarter has a great one on international project on pollution monitoring. And let's not forget that NASA has some as well. As well as that, there's more international ones on air quality monitoring, marine debris. So yeah, quite a few of them out there. You'd really just have to do a quick Google and find out what's near you. Thanks, Yella.
Yeah, do you want to maybe unmute Masidur and ask about, tell us where you're from and what you're interested in?
Hey, hello. Thanks everyone to give me a chance. I'm from Bangladesh. I'm actually working as a volunteer. I love to work as a volunteer. So I am actually searching some kind of remote project so I can contribute something for science. Thanks.
I might add too that iNaturalist is also in Bangladesh. So if you are looking for, you can download the iNaturalist app. If you have access to that, you can download the iNaturalist app, make your own project in that, and have a look at what's around you. It's pretty easy to do. You do have to have 50, before you can make your own project, you do actually have to have 50 observations of your own that are research grade. Otherwise, the system thinks you're a bot. So it's easier if you just go in and do it yourself. iNaturalist is a lot of fun. It really does depend on what your scientific question is, though. So really, what do you want to find out about?
Thank you, Michelle. We always know that you have a good answer to questions. If other people would like to ask any questions, anything that is related to the discussion, or Pat.
Hey, Ayla, how you going? Can everyone hear me? All good? Yeah. Hi, everyone. Thanks for a great presentation. Really wonderful to hear your insights about this. I guess my question is for each of the panelists, thinking about, how are you understanding, whether your projects are making a difference, whether they're meeting the goals that you've set yourself. What does success look like to you? And I guess the second part of that question is, how do you go about measuring that? Are you, conducting some formal assessments through surveys or using rubrics, or is it something a little bit more informal, say through, your own experience, or even, storytelling or communications. It'd be great to hear that aspect to your work and to your projects. And yeah, thanks again.
I can jump in there just because we're in the process of trying to plan the evaluation at the moment. And the science outcomes are fairly easy to measure. How many insects do we find? How many new species do we discover? How many publications do we get out of that? I think the impact for the participants is the thing that's a little bit harder to measure. And I think we're trying to combine both some quantitative stuff with surveys, but also some more qualitative things, because I think that's probably where we're going to be able to explore the most as to what those impacts were on both the students and for the teachers. So yeah, something we're trying to develop at the moment, but it's hard. Well, I'm finding it hard coming from a science background rather than a social science background to work out how we measure impact.
Yeah, that's right, Erin. We actually tried doing both aspects. So every time we did a citizen science project, we had the qualitative as well as the quantitative analysis to it. So the survey questions were like, how accessible these sort of events are, or how would you like to participate more into citizen science activities. And when after every project, when we had the individual project report being presented to funders, there was nearly 100% positive report of people wanting to do more citizen science. So that really, shows the keenness or the need in the community that, yes, citizen science projects are very well, received by the participants, even though certain hands-on things were focused for a particular age group, but we see that the tangential results were much more greater than what was expected. So I would say that framing those evaluation questionnaires of things, a little bit of trick in there, that what do we really want to find out? Is it more of the participation level, or the science, or the the engagement, or so those things, when we have taken the pre and the post survey, so every time our audience were different, sometimes we had to deal with the questionnaires with those children filling those questionnaires out. Sometimes they were parents, sometimes they were professionals. So in every different evaluation, what we found out was that citizen science has got a great potential for variety of audience. Hope that answers the question, Pat.
For our projects, the Breaking Good and Essential Medicines, Yayla's actually been leading that, so I think she should jump in after me and give you an answer to that as well. But we've been doing sort of a range of gathering feedback just for our sort of improvement, as well as some validated surveys. I don't know, ask Yayla. I do want to add though that I think something I'm thinking about a lot lately is teachers are really trying to work on ways we can evaluate science that are not just, we've been just doing lots of standardized tests for a long time, and we're trying to break out of that, but it's really hard to find good examples of that. And I think there's actually probably an amazing opportunity here for scientists like Yayla, who are working on this evaluation of learning outcomes, really understand the sort of how to make a reliable and valid test of changing both the sort of, how do you describe it, like the confidence or the engagement or the enthusiasm, as well as the learning outcomes. But I think also teachers have a lot of expertise in measuring growth of particular learning outcomes as well. So I think there's an amazing opportunity here and I'd really love to see some collaborations between teachers and citizen science evaluation researchers to work on improving this a little bit more. I'm going to hand over to Yayla so she can answer the specifics of our essential medicines and Breaking Good.
Thank you, Jen. Yes, so I actually do have quite a bit of experience doing evaluation of different learning and engagement processes. And I will talk about a range of different kinds of things. So first of all, it is really important to do pre-post, and that is quantitative research, looking at, sort of in a more objective kind of way, what students knew before or what their perceptions were before and after. but often you won't see any difference when you look at that because the scales are not very sensitive. You usually use 1 to 5 scale. And if you say, how much do you love science? And people say 5 in the beginning, and they say 5 in the end, then you won't see any difference. But that doesn't mean that it didn't have an impact on how they love science. And so quantitative research or that kind of test has its limitations. And that's definitely something that I've seen over time. And so I can't stress the importance of qualitative data enough. It's so important to talk to the people and try to get, what their feelings and what their impressions and what their learnings are from sort of a personal perspective. And talking to teachers is also so important because teachers know what their students learned. And so just by, having interviews with teachers, you can already start to understand what the learning outcomes are for students. And we are actually just trying to develop a new kind of evaluation for looking at learning outcomes through citizen science, sort of recognizing that doing that formal evaluation pre and post is also not good enough, if to be completely honest, but also it's difficult for project leaders to also take upon themselves another thing like that and to design evaluation and to use evaluations and to go through ethic processes for that. It's a lot of work for something that won't necessarily give you the outcomes or the results that you're looking for. And so doing some qualitative research, I think, is also really important, and using sort of the observational data of the people who are leading those projects and the people who are, facilitating in order to do some evaluation and to systematically collect that qualitative data, I think is really important. And I'm currently looking into how is the best way to do that. And just, Pat, thank you for the question, because I think it's a really important question, and I think it's something that often we don't discuss enough. So thank you for asking that. Does anybody else?
Yeah, no worries. Well, I was just gonna say, I mean, just a couple of thoughts around the evaluation and thinking about, what is it for? Like, why are we doing it in the first place? Is it to feed back into the design of these projects to make them more impactful, or is it perhaps for demonstrating the impact of the project to some sort of external people, say funders or other people that are interested in your project? So yeah, it's difficult. And then I was just also thinking about, I've seen various open access rubrics and things that could assist projects in helping to evaluate projects, looking at those different categories of impacts around, the science, around the participant outcomes, but also those sort of broader, social community level outcomes as well. So yeah, I agree. It's super important, not done enough, very difficult. Mixed methods approaches would be, a good way to go, but it places a lot of pressure on project organizers, and there needs to be more efficient and effective ways to evaluate citizen science, because we need to demonstrate that these projects, the ever increasing number of projects, are actually making a difference and are leading us towards a future that we hope for. So.
And on that point, maybe schools are a really good place that can jump in and help us, like, shoulder some of that load. Like, teachers need to assess the work we're doing in citizen science anyway. Can they help us develop it and that gives us a bit of a relief from designing it all out ourselves all the time. They're already quite good at this kind of thing.
I think that's a really, really great point. And it just reminds me of, what do they call it? Sort of like participatory evaluation, where you're, encouraging the people, your participants, including them in the evaluation, rather than you as a project organizer doing all the work. Maybe it's just worth sitting down for an hour with a group of people that were involved in the project and doing it together, and embedding that in the actual project design.
There's actually a few groups in Europe, I think, that are working on doing participatory design within citizen science, and I think that's a really interesting approach, particularly because citizen science is all about getting people to do tasks that they're not professionally trained to do. So in that sense, doing their own evaluation is just really continuing the same idea of citizen science. So I think that's a really interesting idea, which I would be really keen to look into a little bit more.
I would just like to point out that currently there are 468 active citizen science projects on our project finder for AXA, 138 of which have teaching materials, and 226 are listed as family friendly, so suitable for kids. So there's plenty of scope there.
Definitely. We'll have to go check all those out.
I want to do an analysis of what types of teaching materials are available with all of them and see what's out there.
That would be really cool.
I agree. So here's the link in the chat of where I got those numbers from. I'm master of the link. Yeah, so again, I've gone onto some of them and I can't see any visual teaching aids either. So perhaps that's something we're also missing from our project finder, is here is a link to the teaching requirements, or here is what it best represents, what age groups, or what part of the curriculum, etc. Maybe that's something else we also need to look for in future on our project finder, is making it easier for that. I'd also like to have an entrance for teachers. I'm looking at this age group and doing science or statistics or something with them. Which ones are out there? What can I use? I think that would make it an easier one-stop shop as well.
Yeah, I would like to jump in to add to Michelle's point. Michelle, that's how the STEM Catalyst developed their products. So complementing the citizen science projects with what sort of other material or what sort of other complementing stuff in the form of interactive games or, things like building puzzles and playing Kahoot, to emphasize the topic, is something that we incorporate always. We developed a hour-long presentation for a project called Wild Pollinators, wherein ABC has got this amazing game on insects that, that virtually, that has got a 3D camera, and the way that you hover around your camera or your finger over that camera, it gives you a different view of an insect. So when we were learning more about bees, it was like, we're here, children are going to explore bees in the backyard, but who's going to hold and bring it close? So we had this game incorporated into that webinar, wherein children can actually hover around, click on the link, hover around that insect, get to know all the body parts, all the anatomy of the thing. And then when they actually get this creeper in the video that you would have seen, a plastic toy kind of thing. So it's a creeper keeper wherein children can actually hold the insect and closely see. So the things that they've seen virtually can be seen, in real life. So what Michelle is saying is right, that, it needs an extra bit of research. And there she is putting another link, Michelle, Critterpedia. So yeah, and those are the things, if we complement that to the citizen science projects, probably it will magnify the, or the impact, and, the fact that teaching resources or lessons that are already planned up alongside the project is probably very helpful. Just teachers pick out those topics, get those lesson plans ready, and away they go for the lesson to be delivered. So I think, yes, I agree on that one, that it is time taking. And as we mentioned that, teachers are time poor, that they really are tight with their schedules. So if we as experts can help teachers have all the things ready for them, so that would really create a big difference.
Thanks, Arj. I'm just wondering, has anyone thought about, you're talking about having the time and building up this stuff. When do you start? Like what time of year? When I volunteer in schools with CSIRO STEM professionals, and unfortunately Meg's just left. She's part of that system as well. But what I've found is I usually start with my teachers that I'm paired with in November of the year before we actually start doing anything. So where is the ideal time to start putting all that stuff in place?
Depends on the school, it depends on the teacher, it depends on the year group. So you've got to avoid the exam blocks they might be doing stuff in and figure out when their deadlines are in terms of submitting the assessments and their unit plans to their head teachers. So some schools that will not exist. There will be no time. They have to do this, so they're totally flexible. And some schools, it's really rigid. You've got to plan it. You've got to send it out to the community. It's got to be approved first. So November's too late. Sorry, that's not an easy answer.
That's okay, because one of the things, I'm an analytical chemist by trade, and when we're doing stuff involving chemistry, I do find that we have to have a certain amount of time to be able to put those PPE requests in, and also the health and safety type stuff as well, risk assessments, all the rest of it. One of the things I'd really like to see for some of these citizen science projects is the risk assessments already done. So it's just a copy and paste, put it in, this is easier. I have offered as a chemist to put those risk assessments in for them and assist with them. But unfortunately up here in Queensland, it's a completely separate system and it's not remote access. You can't get into it. It's someone else has to do it. So yeah, I'd like to see some sort of MSDS style, you know, how we look at an MSDS and it's very rigid of how it's set out. Some sort of very rigid set out of here is the health and safety plan for this activity or something like that. Yeah.
That would be useful, even if it's there and teachers need to put it into their own system. They don't need to make it up. It's there ready to copy and paste over. Yeah, and that's a great idea.
And it's already had expert opinions and expert people saying this is how you do it, therefore this is what we're basing it on. There is some sort of references at the end to say, you know, I got this particular details about the povidone iodine from the MSDS and this date, etc. Yeah.
It would be very helpful.
Yeah, I think that we might bring it to an end since it seems that we're just talking to ourselves a little bit. But again, I just wanted to say thank you so much, Genevieve, Erin, Arjumand. It's been so interesting to talk to all of you. And just lastly, I feel like there are a growing amount of people that are interested in this field and in education and doing citizen science and education things. One of the goals of the early mid-career researcher working group is to bring people together and to continue these conversations. So not to have just these one seminars, but to build from these seminars in order to work collaboratively and to help each other in sort of some of the challenges that we're faced. So if anyone here would like to sort of, you know, continue these conversations, you know, build, you know, a working group within in order to continue these collaborations and discuss, then that is something that we're completely not just open to, but encouraging. And I'll just throw it out there, and please feel free to write to me or to Pat or to anyone else, and to, you know, start to do, you know, ongoing stuff together.
And I've just put the EMCR working group link in the chat as well, Yella.
Perfect. And we will stop the recording, and this will go up hopefully tonight with Michelle's assistance. Thank you.